I really want to hear about your experience in Donbass and whether you can draw some kind of parallels between your experience in the Balkans, because it seems like you're framing that conflict almost like as a proxy war, both in the Balkans, possibly in the former Eastern Ukraine. The involvement, obviously, of that confrontation between Russia and the proverbial West that in my opinion, Russia wasn't really seeking, because it's really been trying to sort of stall this incoming steam train for quite some time, and it was unsuccessful in this sense, which is why the conflict escalated in 2022. But you've been on the ground, so I'm really curious what your impressions are, both as a humanitarian, but also as a geopolitical analyst.
Yeah. Well, listen. Yeah, sorry, Marcelo.
We're going to talk about Ukraine now. I thought we've been talking about Ukraine for the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, might as well take out the names, and it sounds like you might as well be talking about Ukraine, which is very telling.
I can just cut and paste this part if you want to make it short.
You can. To some extent, what happened in ex-Iugoslávia was some sort of pilot for what happened after that in Ukraine. And it's the same method. I mean, that's why I established in the book in Kosovo and my other books is there's a pattern the U.S. goes through before they attack a country. And in this pattern, when I started seeing what was going on in Ukraine, it was the same pattern that the U.S. applied in Yugoslavia, which was the same pattern the U.S. applied in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, in Iran, in Iraq, in Iraq, in Vietnam, where you've always got all of a sudden a country with which the US or the West is going to be getting along with, and then that country all of a sudden takes a political stance on something which is important for the US, but it's mostly important for that population, that people, and all of a sudden that the president becomes a dictator, the people become warmongers, haters, and then there's also all the manipulation, the media manipulation that we start seeing in the West. So Slobodan Milosevic or Gaddafi are fine. I mean, when they're signing deals with Western corporations, but all of a sudden when they start saying that they want a distinctive money for African nations, or that they want to start selling their natural resources in euros, all of a sudden Gaddafi, let's go saying, okay, he's the bad guy, he kills people, and he's sending Viagra to his soldiers so that they could rape whatever they can find in Libya. I mean, and this is true. I mean, this is actually Hillary Clinton said that precisely. And all this pattern is the same. And at the end, just to go through that pattern, it ends up after the media lies, there's manipulation. Like there was no genocide in Kosovo. There were no weapons of mass destruction. There was nothing going on in the Bay of Tonkin in Vietnam, contrary to what the U.S. Marines said. So there's all these lies and manipulation. And at the end, it ends up with U.S. military arriving on location with their NATO buddies. And after that, Western U.S. multinationals, which come up to rebuild the country with either Western or East taxpayers' monies, or exploiting local resources. So when I saw that pattern develop in Ukraine, with all of a sudden these people going to the streets demonstrating, and maybe there was some of these people were sincere. I'm not denying that, but they were demonstrating, and I knew, because I was following what was going on in Ukraine, and I had been to Ukraine before, that a lot of these organizations were receiving money from Brussels, from the US. So this was not grassroots. There was some direction given from above. All of a sudden, Yanukovych, who was fine as long as he was signing a contract with the European Union, and he was a friend, and he would be invited to the West, and he would receive all the best, I would say, the best greeting that he could. Everything was fine with him. But all of a sudden, when he said, before, I just want to sign this partnership with Russia, then mayhem broke out. And mayhem broke out because he was going to sign a project with Russia, which would have brought dozens and dozens of billions of euros or dollars or whatever you are, rubles even more, to Ukraine, to build, to help the economy, to build jobs, to help the Ukraine was at that time, and it's even worse today, the poorest country in Europe. And so it's very bizarre that people will go to the street after the signature of a contract, which is going to bring so much, and Europe and Ukraine and Russia are so close for historical reasons, it would be crazy that they would do this. And then all of a sudden, Mircovic became this bad guy. So he is a Russian puppet. He was fine the day before, but right after that. And then there was these manifestations, and always, I found that also, and I described that in my book on the U.S. empire, is that we do not hesitate to use the most extreme movements in the world to topple governments, because you won't find a liberal Democrat to go in the streets and topple the government. That just doesn't exist. So you have to find some sort of extremist. And the US always counts on extreme young men galvanized by some sort of ideology or religion, because they're ready to go to the streets. They're ready to fight, to die for their cause. And so that's what they're going to do. And that they used fundamental Islamists in Afghanistan, they used Islamists in Bosnia, they used extreme nationalists in Kosovo, and they in Croatia as well, neo-Nazis, and they used again the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. I said, guys, you've done it before, they're doing it again. And of course, just for these groups always disappear once the dirty job has been done. Either they're sent to the front line to be used as cannon fodder, or they disappear. Maybe some of the bosses, they enter the government and they forget their past, and those were errors when they were younger. So this was the thing. The playbook was just open. And when we had in 2014 the coup d'etat, because it was a coup d'etat, I said, okay, the US is going way too far, the EU as well, and Russia will not accept it, because this means that we will have an anti-Russian, I would say, country on Russia's border, and nobody could accept that. If, let's say, whatever in France, something which could be, if you would take Spain, it would become, there would be a coup d'etat in Spain, and it would be under the ISIS, for example. France would be extremely scared. They would say, we can't tolerate this. We don't want ISIS having missiles on south of the Pyrenees. We don't want them influencing people in France. We've got to do something. And no country can accept a neighbor country, which has an ideology which is oriented against yourself. And the idea behind this coup d'etat was to transform Ukraine into an anti-Russian country. And a lot of the proponents of the Maidan said that they wanted even to forbid the use of the Russian language, which was the lingua franca of Ukraine. Is the only language that all Ukrainians spoke more or less to get along. And in the east and the south and in Kiev, it's the language everybody spoke. And I was in Kiev and I was in Donbass in 2010, and a lot of people spoke Russian. So this was bound to end bad. And when I said that, okay, I'll do as I did in ex-Iugoslávia and in Kosovo. I went in 2014 in Lugansk. I went to Prvomaisk to discuss with the people, to understand what was going on. And I gathered some goods in France, a little bit of money, and I bought food, because a lot of the people, it was war. And we went to Prvomaisk. This was on the front line, and people were fighting. And a couple blocks away from where I was, you could hear the machine guns and all that. And people would come out of the cellars. And they would come out of the cellars because they knew, because I had contacted people who contacted people. It was all quite crazy, but they came out of the cellars like not like animals, because this is a degrading image, but I felt a lot of pity. And I definitely didn't think I would see, I didn't even see that in Kosovo or in Yugoslavia. Yeah, it was tough. People would get out of the cellars and they go back in, and they lived in buildings where there were humongous holes from missiles that the Ukrainian army sent on them. So I came back to France, and my idea was at the same time, the same as I did in Kosovo. Listen, this is what I saw on the ground. Why isn't anybody speaking about this? This is terrible. Before 2022, there were 14,000 people killed in Donbass, 30,000 or 50,000 people wounded, over 1 million people displaced. These are migrants nobody talked about, and most of them went to Russia, by the way. And nobody was talking about that. I even brought a young boy and his mother in 2017. I got them to come over to France from Donbass. And the young boy, he got shrapnel in his back, and he was paralyzed from his waist down. And I brought him to France, and I said, since France doesn't care about the war in Donbass, I'm going to bring the Donbass war to France. And I called the media, and I did press conferences, and I asked them to interview this mother. Why are you not talking about what's going on in Donbass? A lot of the mainstream media didn't come, and those who came, they didn't talk about it. And I said, why didn't you talk about this? They say, but my editor-in-chief doesn't want to talk about this. I said, you guys, this is going to become a major war if we don't do anything. There are Minsk agreements that we're not following. France is not doing anything to make sure that Ukraine and even Russia or even the Donbass do something for peace. And they have a relationship with Russia. They could discuss. If they're not doing anything, you must understand that the way things are going now, if we don't do anything to curb the violence, then it will get out of hand. And they didn't care. And the only media which were interested were alternative media. So a lot of alternative media, they came and they spoke about it because they were interested and they understood that something was going on. So to make a long story short, I've been there every year since, except COVID, where I was not allowed to go anywhere. And just to do the same thing, to get the information on the ground, bring humanitarian aid. And when I bring humanitarian aid, I never say, are you for Kiev? We never say, are you for Kiev? Are you for Moscow? We just want to help people who are suffering. And that's the aim of our association, West East, is we think that Europe is one big civilization. We've got differences. We've got a common culture coming from the Greeks, coming from Christianity. There's room for minorities, but we have to defend what we are today. And definitely wars can only drag us down, especially in this multipolar war. We've got countries with incredible development. And so we're, as we said at the beginning of this discussion, we're getting erased from this planet because we're not taking our own destiny in our own hands. So we try to help the people get back to peace. But I wrote, of course, and since Kosovo, have been discussing a lot with universities, with journalists, with media, to share this information. Say, okay, how can we find a solution? How can we avoid this? And when after 2022, all of a sudden, I started getting much more spotlight on my works because nobody in France was saying this is going to get out of hand. And then all of a sudden, people saying, "Oh, wow, maybe we might be going toward War III." Guys, we've been saying this for 10 years. Why are you only waking up now? So. Better late than never. But this is I think it was very interesting on my side to confirm, unfortunately, that we have free speech. So that means I can go to the local pub and say whatever I want. I could discuss with my friend and say whatever I want. But I don't have access to mainstream media, or rarely, sometimes once in a while, because maybe the trainee didn't do a good job trying to find out who I am. I get invited, but usually it doesn't last so long. But it confirmed that unfortunately in the West, we don't like discussions. We don't like debate. There's a narrative, there's an agenda, and we have to stick to that. And the pundits that we see today, on mainstream media, most of them, it's easy to find on internet, paid, either through NATO organizations, American or Brussels lobby firms. And so there is no real debate. So again, we're getting back to propaganda from Bernays. We're getting back to the fabrication of consent. But this has just proven to me that, I mean, I'm on the right side of history. I may not be right on everything, but definitely if we want free speech, and if that's important, we have to fight to get it back, because that's the first path to peace.
Yeah, I think that's a depressing way to get validation for your predictions. Yes. And we've had other guests on this channel who've also been to the region and who've made similar predictions and who've received similar depressing validations, and no one was paying attention until 2022. And of course, in the beginning, it wasn't perfect, but there was some media coverage coming from the mainstream. And then I think as the Minsk agreements were implemented and the fighting did die down, it didn't completely die down, the living conditions were still horrible. I'm pretty sure you were one of the only Western, or at least European, humanitarian organizations who continued to travel there, because I didn't really see much coverage coming from anyone else, because they said, well, this is a frozen conflict now, we're just gonna let it go. And it's really, it's definitely commendable that you continue to pursue your work, because you realize that this isn't the end.